Good afternoon. Welcome to Artist and Critic, a program devoted to problems and features in the arts. I'm Don Gray. Tonight, this afternoon, rather, we're very fortunate and very seriously about it to have, in my opinion, one of the premier artists of our time, an artist who has had a long and rich career and is still vigorously producing, Miss Alice Neel. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Miss Neel.
Thank you.
It really is it's an honor. You are a figurative artist. How did you fight off the overwhelming influence of abstraction in our own time? How did you keep from being sucked in, as so many other artists were, to not only abstract work, but perhaps more superficial expression?
Well, because I thought I was right. I always thought that man himself was the prime mover. I don't mean to be didactic, but I don't see how you could leave him out completely, you know. You don't have to just have people, but people are everywhere, and they're in everything.
But so many artists are, despite, I happen to agree with you, but so many artists have been satisfied with painting with paint rollers and squares and so forth.
Well, listen, they were all trying to get away from the First Depression, but now they're in another one. The First Depression, for instance, Harold Rosenberg loathed the First Depression. And any mention of anything from those days, he'd say, my God, we don't want to go back to that. Because it was poverty, it was difficulty and everything else, and everybody, of course, was getting a lesson in politics. Everybody was then believed even in socialism.
So you're saying that reality is a little bit too hard for people to bear?
It was too difficult, and abstraction got out of all of it. Not that I'm against abstraction, because really, although it didn't work in China, I believe in Mao Zedong's theory of let all flowers bloom, which is what is happening now. Everybody is doing what they want, and it all is shown in a polyglot market.
Do you think freedom hasn't really increased? Is it opening, perhaps the art world is opening more than it was?
Yes, surely, of course. In 1960, they had a big show at the Guggenheim of abstraction, and right then abstraction began to go down. But now at the Whitney, they have a great abstract show, and people are looking at it again as history, you know, and it's still interesting.
You think people are moved by abstraction?
Well, I think it's been a big historical movement, and not only that, but I think there's an element of abstraction in all art, even when it's realistic.
There's no question about it. I think maybe that is one of the benefits of others, that abstract art has provided an awareness of the abstract basis of all great art, whether it's yours or Rembrandt's.
Sure, and not only that, it's the first time America ever got in on the European scene. Before that, American painting was considered sort of backwoods and naive. But with the abstraction, well, everybody was copying it. I mean, England, every other country.
Isn't that a bad sign, in a sense, that
that they copy it?
Yeah, that one copies becomes sort of a second-hand experience rather than a...
No, you can't, because that's how things go. You know, there's the mode, there's styles, there's fashions. And even though they're cyclical, still...
But you didn't go with the fashions.
No, not me.
Now, why didn't you do that?
Well, because I'm, what is it, pig-headed? No, I don't know. Because I wanted to do as I pleased. And I thought, I think that art, beside being art, I think art is history. And I think it's great to, well, I just felt like that. I like to paint what was around me, the environment was in, and everything else that went with that.
How did you support yourself, if this isn't too intimate a question? Did you teach, or did you work at some other job?
Well, occasionally I did things like that. I did all sorts of things, and then I lived with some men, and they usually had some money. And money was not a first premise in my mind, although I know you have to pay rent and you have to eat. But I would rather, for instance, not be well dressed and do as I please in art than put the burden of making money with art. In fact, if I were now a young artist, I'd rather do some other kind of work rather than make my art conform to what would bring in money.
Well, I think any artist of any stature would do that, don't you think?
Yes, I think
you're not a real artist if you're turning your art into an acceptable direction in order to make some money.
Andy Warhol said business art is better because you don't have to accumulate it.
business art is
Business
better?
art is better than just plain art because you don't have to have shelves for it or anything. You just sell it.
Could you explain that? You've lost me
Yes,
there.
I could. Or even Gertrude Stein said it is good to be someone that is succeeding. It's very nice to be part of the world in which you live, yes. But for instance, art is much better off now than it was in the 30s, although I was on the WPA for 7 years.
What was the feeling of that? What kind of work did you produce?
I was
What
on
were
the
your-
easel project. I still did just as I pleased, but I had to turn in a picture. The size was 24 by 30. I had to turn a picture in every 6 weeks. But the whole world was on the WPA project. Jackson Pollock, de Kooning, all of them, every
Yeah.
one of them. They would all have probably died of starvation if there hadn't been a WPA project, which did not keep the senators and representatives from criticizing it all the time and saying that the art project was just a form of boondoggling. Which of course wasn't true,
exactly.
because if they hadn't had these things, the whole society would have collapsed. In fact, I heard a labor leader say the other night that Ford is a successor to Hoover. Maybe I shouldn't say anything political, though.
Well, that's all right. I just hope he isn't in terms of being in the midst of a depression or the...
Well, don't you think we have a minor depression now? More than minor.
Well, I feel like we do, but they keep telling us that we're on the rebound all the time.
Well.
But, what do you think is the present social situation in terms of being reflected in the arts? Do the arts today reflect, is society today in a state of decay, and is art expressing that, or has art refused to face reality, as you said earlier?
Well, after all, we've gone through an era of destruction. I mean, what are those smashed up cars of Chamberlain?
John Chamberlain.
Yeah, I mean, they show some sort of a society that, I don't know, according to standards, is going downhill, or conceptual art. And then there was a movement, nothing to buy, nothing to sell. That's against galleries. But then there was a big student revolt. The 70s, somehow one feels empty in the 70s. Because the student movement, the Black Panthers, all of these things have disappeared. The only thing that's new is our new position in the world. We're not exactly as secure as we once were.
We're not top
because,
dog.
for instance, the Arabs have learned our tricks, and they're now doing them, you know.
Perhaps we could turn to some of your work. It will speak for itself, but certainly you have penetrated so deeply into the character of your sitters, and psychological penetration, and just the whole presentation of the character and the feeling of your sitters. And the first picture we'll be looking at will be the one that opened the show, double portrait of the artist brothers Raphael and Moses Sawyer.
And they're also twins.
Oh, they are twins?
They're not just brothers, they're twins, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that picture?
Well, I painted that in '73. And Moses, the one on the right, although maybe on the screen it's the left, the one in the darker suit, said to me, you know, you've been talking about painting us, but you better do it pretty soon because none of us are going to live forever. And the funny thing is, he did die before the year was out, you know, or before '74 was out. They came from Russia in 1912. They've been very serious artists all their lives. Now, when they posed for me, they talked to each other in Russian. So I felt like the janitor or something, because they were talking about art problems, and I was dying to hear what they were saying, but of course I couldn't understand a word of it.
Did you feel particularly close to them as artists and human beings because they were sort of thinking along your lines?
Well, I tell you, I never was intimate friends with them, but I was always very fond of them, and they always had respect for my work. And in fact, right now I have a retrospective in the Georgia Museum, and Raphael wrote a little part in the catalog.
Okay, we can go on to the next picture, and this is a beauty. This is a
That's
tremendous...
Dorothy Gillespie. She's the head of the Women's Inter-Art Center. And the reason she looks so saintly, well, I talked to her for about a half hour, and any number of times she made that gesture. But she also is a very wonderful person, completely dedicated to helping women without any backbiting, without any meanness or anything else.
What has been your experience as a woman artist? Have you
Well,
suffered because of that?
Well, you know, it's women and blacks were supposed to be second-class citizens. Women are only now getting liberated, although I'm just now very late reading, who is the wolf? What's that book, you know?
Who's Afraid of?
A Room of One's Own.
Oh.
Oh, God.
No, I'm drawing a blank. I'm not that
I'll think of it in a
literarily
minute.
minded. Okay.
I'll think of it when I get too excited, then I can't think of it.
Okay, maybe we can go, we're missing part of the picture, but the bottom part, beautiful striped sofa and so forth. What I was going to ask you about in relation not only to this picture of Dorothy Gillespie, but your own position as a woman.
It's more difficult because I can't say that I was really abused for being a woman, but you have less opportunity because it's a man's world.
When you said you were a second-class citizen, maybe you were almost a third-class citizen. I think being an artist, does that make you a second-class?
Well, it did. For many years it did, yes. Now it doesn't, because now America is culture crazy, which is a very good thing.
Yeah. We have a tremendously interesting painting now. Could you tell us about this one?
Jackie Curtis and Rita Red. After Andy Warhol posed for me, he sent Jackie Curtis. She, or I should say he, it is a he.
The one on the right?
Although I don't know how far you can go on TV. Can
No,
I say anything?
I think
Well,
you can
the
say
first
whatever
question he asked me was if I thought he should have his penis cut off. And I said, well, I wonder if I were you because you might need it.
Might change your mind.
Yeah, you might need it someday. But actually, I then called him she because he has all the appurtenances of a very beautiful woman, even.
In terms of garment or feature?
And in fact, his skin was something that any woman would envy. And Rita Red, that little chap, he's a perfectly normal person, but he admires Jackie Curtis very much. And the funny thing was, they called me up and they said, we'll come up, Andy wants us to come up and pose for you. And I said, well, that's great. And they said, we'll come up tomorrow, but you haven't even seen this yet. So I was having dinner with someone at the Harvard Club. Shall I keep on?
Yeah, sure, whatever you want.
So I said, why don't you meet me? I was going to meet him at 7. So I said, why don't you meet me there at 6 and we'll have a drink? And we got thrown out. We went up, they then had a women's section. It was segregated. It was about 71, I guess, in the Harvard Club. And we went up to the women's section, and finally a man in a tuxedo came over and said, I'm afraid you'll have to leave because gentlemen have to wear jackets in the Harvard Club. But why they would have thought that Jackie Curtis was a gentleman, I don't know.
I guess the Harvard Club has their own particular...
Well, of course. This is Walter Gutman. He's been quite a figure in the art world. He makes some drawings and paintings himself, and he also put the money in for, did you ever see that documentary, Pull My Daisy?
No,
about the beat. It was about Allen Ginsberg and Corso and
the
Kerouac.
poets.
Yes. Well, I was in that film too.
You were?
Yes, and anyway, he put up the finances for that. He also is either a bull or a bear on the stock market. I'm showing him because he is almost an obsolete type. There won't be a type like this again. Now, the way I painted it, I saw him come into the Martha Jackson Gallery looking just like this. But I didn't have him pose for me. I didn't get him until about 2 years later. But I knew exactly what I was going to do. All I had to do was paint it. Because that hat that looks as though he sits on it and the way he stands. Yeah. Now, after this, you should show the modern market man. All right?
Sort of the contrast of
Well, the Madison Avenue,
generations.
his successor in...
So we'll go to the next picture.
Yes.
And from the freewheeling old-timer.
Now this is Timothy Collins, you see, in his elegant plastic chair. He is the successor of the old-fashioned stock market man.
So aside from, in addition to talking about his individual personality, you're talking about a certain social type. Is that what you're saying?
Well, look, you know what? You know, another thing I think art is great also is history, because it's reality that creates the situations, and when people participate in them, I think it shows, you know.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we have the
next one.
Next picture.
All right.
And are we gonna? Okay. Okay, moving on. Oh, here's a beauty.
This is
such a tremendously...
Philip Pearlstein's wife, a very nice, intelligent, concerned woman, you know. She herself was an artist. She taught, I think, at Queens for a number of years.
What has been her position relative to her husband, who, of course, is the well-known painter and getting a
Well,
lot
she has been a great help to him. That's it.
in promoting his career and supporting
everything.
him? And
There's nothing in the world as good as a good wife. They may be passing out of, they may be becoming obsolete in these days, but they were great. They were unselfish. They helped.
How does that mesh with the idea of a woman having a life of her own? Now, did she have to give up her painting to do
Well, I
for her
can't
husband?
comment on that because I don't know really what went on there. I just know that she was very helpful to him.
We have a beautiful close-up. Can we go back to that close-up of Mrs. Pearlstein?
Oh, isn't that great?
have
Now you see that concerned face.
You
know, I
she's
forgot
suffering.
to look up
Is
there.
she suffering?
Well,
You
she's
give a
not
feeling
suffering, but she's very serious. She's very factual. She's different from me. You know, I have my little vagaries. I like to dream a bit. But she's very intelligent also.
Well, maybe to be intelligent is suffering. And while we're looking at this, I'd like
I
to...
did another one of her that was stolen, too. Somebody heard I was going to have a show at the Whitney, and they stole 2 paintings from me. Ava Helen Pauling, Linus Pauling's wife, and the other one that I did of Dorothy Pearlstein.
You mean that increased the value of your painting so that art thieves closed in on you?
Well, I don't know, but
wait, can we keep that picture just for a second? And I want to read a brief line from the review of Miss Neel's show at the Whitney Museum early in 1974. It was written by James R. Mello, and he says of Miss Neel's paintings, "It is a very personal record in which the artist seems to have fixed upon the angst, anguish, wretchedness, vanity, or arrogance of her subjects, as if life were always some form of irremediable disease." How do you feel about that?
Well, I tell you what, it's not for nothing that they gave the Nobel Prize to Beckett. Only he carries it even further than I do because he carries it to actual death. I think there is a frightful rat race in the world, don't you?
I feel exactly that way, and that's what struck me about that picture. You were talking about her being the happy housewife.
She's not a happy housewife. She's never been a housewife. Really,
okay, poor choice of words. It just seemed like she had made herself secondary to her husband's career, and this is really one of the pressing issues of human fulfillment these days.
Well, it was the custom.
It was the custom.
Sure, she does. She does. Well, for one thing, she's ambitious and she's very intelligent. You know?
Okay, thanks very much for holding that shot. And why don't we see what we have coming up next? Oh, this is another tremendous painting. It's very unusual in its dimensions. What is it, 36 by 80?
It's 36 by 80, and it's my daughter-in-law. It's right now down in a retrospective I'm having in the Georgia Art Museum in Athens, Georgia. This is not only a figure, but it's also a whole interior. And that picture on the wall, can you see the picture on the wall? You'd have to pull your up now.
They can pan
can
up,
you take
perhaps.
it down?
Yeah, there. They're behind the leaves.
That's Audrey McMahon, who was one of the heads of the art project, and who looked villainous like that because she was the people that hired and fired. She was the person who hired and fired people.
And when you say the people who were fired, they were artists, right?
They were all artists, yes, of course. And they used to give a pink slip.
When you compose a picture like this with this very thoughtful, pensive figure, well, you must, because seeing the emotional content of your work, use those leaves symbolically behind the figure to express inner being, in a sense, or inner...
Well, you know, it was a kind of a growth. I mean, I just liked the way they looked together, you know. She in the plane almost looks as though it's growing out of her.
Yeah,
and then the light on the floor. So it's a figure in an interior.
This, we're looking at the work of really, and I say it in all honesty, one of the major artists of our time, and Miss Neel has said that she's unknown. Well, she may be unknown to the world at large, but after years and years of struggle and painting, yeah, we can go to the next picture if you like.
Oh yes,
she is has
Isabel,
kept the faith.
Yeah, Isabel Bishop.
who was a well-known artist in her own
Yeah,
right.
she just recently had a retrospective at the Whitney. She's very upper class and very benign.
Has she suffered from, number one, being an artist, and two, being a woman?
Well,
Artist.
not as much, because a stable income is always a help, you know. It saves you from a lot of things. But she's very concerned, and she's a very supportive, nice person. You know, every time I have a show or something, she writes and tells me how much she liked it and everything, yes.
Could I? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The hands there are very
they're absolutely
significant. She had a party that I went to, and there were three lady artists in their 70s there. Isabel Bishop and, who's the woman that does those big wooden things?
Nevelson.
Louise Nevelson and me, yes.
How do you all get along as personalities?
Beautifully,
you
sure,
you
of
have
course.
so much in
Although
common.
I think Nevelson is probably better known than anyone, you know.
What were you trying to express with those hands? You said they were significant, and certainly in their boniness and the veininess of them, the sort of grasping and stretching and twisting, almost like Van Gogh's hands.
She has worked very, very hard, Isabel Bishop. I mean, even though she was maybe comfortable financially, she still put out a tremendous amount of effort. She always had a studio in the city and worked there.
Could I ask you two back-to-back questions as we move toward another picture? What has been the lowest, hardest point of your life and career, and the highest point?
Well, of course, I have two sons. When they were small, it was very difficult for me, because art is almost a dangerous profession. You get involved in art and you forget everything else.
Did they suffer, in other words, because
no, they
of
didn't suffer, but it was just an effort for me not to be more in the art world. I still produced all the pictures, but I wasn't very much in the art world.
In terms of circulating amongst the galleries and the openings and the clubs.
Although
and the
I don't really like that too much. Do you like that part?
I despise it.
Yeah, I do
don't
too.
like it at all.
I do too.
Yeah.
I don't think it really even helps you very much. And I then had a theory that if you painted a good picture, even though it went to a shelf, that still you had painted that picture. And of course this was justified when I had a show at the Whitney, because a lot of the pictures came right out off a shelf. And in fact, during the bicentennial, I'm going to have one out on the Parkway in Philadelphia that has been on the shelf since 1950 of a Spanish family. Isn't that great? And now it's going to be, I'm going to have two. This naive one from 1950 of a black Puerto Rican family, and another rather decadent one of the Gruen family, you know, John Gruen and Jane Wilson. Yes, yes.
Well, when you say rather decadent, you just lead me on when you say things like that.
Well, I tell you how I mean decadent. They're so sophisticated and all that compared to these simple Puerto Ricans. That's all. The contrast is terrific. But I'm delighted to have those two together.
And perhaps saying something about the
now this is June Blum. She's in Woman's Lib. I told her she looked like Louis XIV, but that offended her. I couldn't imagine why, because she does look like Louis XIV, rather. And that is a wig, you know. Also, she made all those clothes. She is a curator at the museum, I think it's Stony Brook. She's one of the few women curators.
Oh, is she one of the curators?
I think so.
We had Susan Stitt, the director of the museum at Stony Brook, on the other couple of weeks ago.
She's
one of the curators.
Yes, yes.
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't known her.
And she's very much involved in Woman's Lib. There's going to be a show of drawings in the Brooklyn Museum, and she's had a hand in that, you know.
What would you say you're revealing about her character here as we look at the
Well,
portrait?
you know what? You know, there's a great Egyptian either painting or I think it's a bas-relief in the Metropolitan. It says that he who runs may read. Actually, all writing was originally pictures.
Yeah, pictographs.
So they are a way of communicating.
Yeah.
And if you're in the arts for a long while, pictures do communicate to you, don't you think? Yeah.
More directly and more fiercely than words do in many cases.
So I think she, well, you're You're
Beg
supposed to
pardon?
get your reaction to it.
Am I supposed to tell you my feeling?
Well, Tom Armstrong, the director of the Whitney, had this in his apartment not this summer, but the summer before.
What was his reaction
Well, he
after?
got such a kick out of her appearance, and then there's a kind of a baby blue wall in back of her, and he thought the wall and the way she looked were so different that he got a great kick out of that.
There's a sort of, well, I won't say anything about June Blum. I'm going to untactfully ask for the next picture, and I'll escape.
Take the next.
Yeah, let's have the next one.
Oh, that's
yeah.
my daughter-in-law
Yeah,
with the twins. And of course, they look to me like, you know, the future climbing up on us. Because what is a generation? 20 or 30 years?
Something, probably roughly about 20 years, I'd say, 20,
Yeah,
25.
well, they're the new generation, you know.
Are they, we have 1 minute, Miss Neel, and in that
Oh, is
remaining...
that all? Show another picture then.
You want, well,
Fast.
all right, well, okay, go ahead, we'll move.
Oh, that's,
yeah, okay.
that's Linda Nachlin and her daughter. She's the head of the art department at Vassar. She wrote a book called Realism, and she now teaches at Barnard 1 day a week. She's also a big woman libber.
Is she for or against realism? I must ask that question.
Oh, well,
I think it's,
she likes Pearlstein's work very much, and she liked my work. I think she's for realism.
One of the qualities of this picture as we fade back to us and then we get the painting again. Yeah,
Put Andy on, why don't you?
Oh, yeah, okay. Let me just quickly ask this question. You have such a tremendous contrast between the weary, world-weary, suffering adult and the eager, untouched child.
Well,
And
that's the
isn't
way
that the story of the, is that the story of the painting, really? The
Well,
whole
know what
contrast?
life is today? Children are all dying to grow up, but when they grow up, it's so complicated that then they wish they were children again.
You know what this reminds me of? You've encapsulated it in one picture, but you think of Rembrandt's early self-portraits as a young man,
Yes.
this buoyant, cocky,
Yes.
assured, neck straight up on his body, you know, that kind of thing. And then his older ones where he's suffered
Yes.
all his
Can
losses.
you put him on?
Yes. We'll
Just lay
close
it in
up.
front of it, yeah.
Okay, as we close up, because time has run out on us, we can focus in on Miss Neel's memorable portrait of Andy Warhol, the artist who was shot and then nearly died and was operated on. And as we look at the picture in this new crumpled New York Times review that I brought here, the incision and so forth is not really visible, but is an excellent picture and really another example of the tremendous work by Alice Neel, who has...
The Whitney owns those two.
The Whitney?
Warhol and the Sawyers.
Fantastic.
Isn't that nice?
It's time that a woman and an artist of her stature has been recognized, and we thank Alice Neel, really one of the significant artists of our time, for coming. Realism is coming back. It's going to turn the art world around. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. Good night.